All right. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome those of you who are in the room here with us at the African American Research Library and Cultural Center, as well as those folks who may be watching us live. We are streaming tonight both on Facebook and YouTube for Broward County Libraries. But whether you are online with us or with us in person, I want to personally welcome you to the institution. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Dr. Tameka Hobbs, and I have the privilege of serving as the manager of ARLIC, as we call it. And I'm very glad to be with you tonight for what we're going to call an enhanced regular meeting of the South Florida branch of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. We have been meeting and kind of really digging in for the last 3-4 months, Charlene. And this week is special. This past Monday, we celebrated the Founders Day for ASALH, Association for the Study of African American Life and History. It was in September 9th, 1915, that Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded this organization. And so we are obligated as a branch to do our part and help people to mark this occasion. But in thinking about what we could do, we decided to have a special conversation, which is a conversation of the moment in the state and both across the nation. And it is inspired, of course, by the vision of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And while he founded ASALH in 1915, it was one of many entities that he created, not only the organization. There's the Journal of Negro History that he founded. There's Associated Publishers to publish academic works, the Negro History Bulletin, of course, famously Negro History Week, which has now given us Black History Month. But all of that was in service to a very critical need. And that is the need for all people, but especially Black people, to have truthful, accurate information on their own history. And here we are in 2024, 109 years later, I think, fighting these same battles. And so I am so pleased to have this really talented assembly of dedicated people who've been doing this work for moments such as this. And we are going to have a conversation about the state of Black history education that is informed by the legacy of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the president of the South Florida branch of ASALH, and that is none other than Charlene Farrington, who is the executive director of the Spady Cultural Heritage Museum in Delray, Florida. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you. So, Tameka, you just said everything that I have written down. So I'm going to say it again. Good evening to everyone here and everyone watching online. I'm Charlene Farrington, director of the Spady Cultural Heritage Museum in beautiful downtown Delray Beach. Our mission at the Spady Museum is to preserve and share Black history. I'm also the outgoing president of the South Florida branch of ASALH. And ASALH stands for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Excuse me. Similarly, ASALH's mission is to promote, research, preserve, interpret, and disseminate information about Black life, history, and culture to the global community. ASALH was founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in September of 1915. And we gather today to honor the founding of this most important organization 109 years ago. The urgency of the mission of this organization is as critical now as ever. Dr. Woodson also initiated the celebration of the Negro History Week in 1926, which expanded into Black History Month in 1976. I invite you to visit asalh.org, ASALH.org, to learn more of the many other accomplishments of Dr. Woodson, particularly the publication of The Miseducation of the Negro in 1933. Dr. Woodson was emphatic in this publication that Black people must be educated about their own cultures and about the accomplishments of Black people. We're going to talk about educating our people a little in a few minutes, especially educating our children. If you haven't read this book yet, The Miseducation of the Negro. Your $10 donation this evening will get you a copy to take home with you. If you are online, we ask that you go to asalh.org and order your copy from the organization. Your financial support is greatly appreciated. Finally, I invite you to join us. Join the South Florida branch of ASALH, where we will host more events such as this and other Black History events as well. We are social at ASALH South Florida, Facebook and Instagram, and visit asalhsouthflorida.com to join the organization. We really, truly appreciate you being here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Charlene. And yes, we part of what we have been doing is really working to build the South Florida branch. And so if as we conclude the program tonight, if anyone is not a member yet and is interested in becoming a member of our branch of ASALH, we do invite you to consider that this evening. So when it comes to our topic of discussion tonight, I'm going to ask that as everyone speaks that they introduce themselves, but I want to get us started by hearing from the voices of the people who are in the trenches, who are working in the K-12 environment with the specific role of making sure that Black history education is taking place. And so Brian Knowles is here from Palm Beach County. We have my good friend, good buddy, Marion Williams, who's here with Broward County, as well as Roberto Fernandez III, who's also here in Broward County. So I would like to ask the three of you, perhaps starting with Brian, to just talk about what Black history education looks like right now in Palm Beach County.
Okay, absolutely. So thank you again for the invite and allowing me in this space this evening. Right now, Palm Beach County, to be able to kind of continue to move the work forward of making sure that all of our children learn Black history, and specifically for our Black children to learn about themselves, it's an arduous task. One of the things I definitely want to say is that sometime when we're talking about the state of Black history and some of the challenges that we face in the state of Florida with it, is that, right now, because we have very explicit laws that have combated what we're doing, that we blame that. But I think that we've been dealing with these challenges even before that, right? I don't think the state of Florida has done a very good job, and just now we have somebody to blame and kind of throw rocks and kind of hide behind. But we're able to move the work forward. It's not easy to move it forward. And one of the biggest challenges that we have is just building capacity with our teachers around these topics. And because of just the political climate, there's just such a fear with teachers, and so many of our teachers and also our leaders are so fearful and so unclear about what's fact from fiction because of the laws. First of all, very ambiguous, very confusing. Then on top of that, the media is propagating one narrative, and there's a reality also that exists within our state legislation. So right now, just getting through to our educators, and most importantly, our leaders. Like sometimes we place everything on educators, but sometimes we have leaders who constrain our teachers and don't allow our teachers any time to, have autonomy and freedom of instruction. But our leaders are fully understanding that, first of all, Black history, you're not going to jail, you're not getting in trouble for teaching Black history. But there are some things that we have to circumvent, but we successfully circumvented it. So we still, within almost every high school, we still offer the African American history elective, and we're still working in the K-5 environment as well to make sure that we can integrate the content within the core subject areas of elementary.
I want to pick up there and really get granular, because part of what I hope to empower all of us to do by the end of this conversation is to be solutions focused. So when you talk about leadership, are you talking about leadership within the school? Are we talking about school boards? Could you talk about kind of what the infrastructure looks like and what the barriers may look like that you're experiencing?
Absolutely. So when I say leadership, I'm talking about at the executive level, at the district level, and also at the school-based level. And so we make a concerted effort, and I thank you for mentioning that about being solution-based, because sometimes we get in these spaces and we vent, in opposed to really identifying solutions for the issues that we're venting about. So we're making a very concerted effort to reach out to those schools, to provide professional development, to make clear language and provide clarification of what the state laws say. In addition to that, we do an arduous job of making sure that we develop the instructional materials that are deemed so-called safe for our teachers and our leaders to understand that we can move forward with this, that no one's going to get in trouble for it. And there's more benefits that outweigh the difficulties and the potential trouble anyway. So really just working with them and just explaining what needs to be done. And first of all, just supplying the materials, supplying the lesson plans that are within, first of all, that are backed by state benchmarks and standards, and also to stay within compliance of just some of the things that are mentioned in 1003.42 subsection H. Absolutely.
So Brian, I want to ask you a question about demographics. How much do you think demographics plays a role in the issues that are held in Palm Beach County? And because, you know, there are a lot of people in Palm Beach County, and when we talk about educating children about Black history, we're talking about educating all children, not just certain subgroups of children. How much do you think demographics plays a role in that?
It plays a big part, because what we see is that when it comes to our leaders, again, they believe that if I don't have a population of African diasporic children in my classroom, that is not a necessity to teach it, right? Which I completely disagree, because we know African American history is American history, is world history, right? You can't even have a conversation without American history, without centering Black folks within that conversation, as we know. But we have so many people that are under impression that what we teach has to be identical to the demographics of that school. Working with schools of a huge Hispanic population, not understanding that Hispanic history is African history, right? Hispanic culture is African culture. And helping our kids understand that, helping our leaders understand that, first of all, that African-American history is not like something that's a footnote or something that's just not like a side note of history. It is history. So that has posed a challenge. But what we also find is, even amongst our own people sometimes in leadership, that are so fearful of challenging the status quo or really breaking out of that colonial mindset or that subconscious box sometimes, that we don't want to upset white folks, by teaching our history and telling our stories of being deemed too Black per se. So it's just a continual conversation to really break down these mental barriers more than anything else. First of all, with our leaders, understanding that, Black history is everybody's history. As much as all children need to know who they are, others need to know who we are as well and see the humanity in us as well.
I definitely echo that. I think that is a huge misconception. It's very limiting, and it has real impact in the world, because when in this country, majority population folk don't understand our story, it has just all kinds of implications that we can see everywhere, even in the presidential debates sometimes. I want to come to Marion and Roberto and ask you the same thing when it comes to Broward County. How are things going with instruction?
So I want to say that we definitely want to look at the glass half full, right? Because one thing that this state, Florida, we have a mandate.
Yes.
Right? We have a mandate that we can work with. And if you actually read the mandate actually have been reinforced with even more aggressive topics. So if you only taught the mandates, you have a plethora that you can teach about people who look like us, right? And the fear that you cannot teach is what we have to overcome. I think it's very important for us to start with our parents and our community to make sure we're holding schools accountable, because the law still says it must be taught K through 12 across the curriculum. And so if your child is coming home and you never see anything about African American history, this is where you need to be on the phone calling. So when we talk about leadership, and in Broward, we've had about 4 superintendents in 18 months. So we're struggling with that level of consistency. So I will say, prior to that, under a stable superintendent, you are able to see your work. You're able to see a system in place for teachers to be trained, for materials to be vetted, and also to have a constant feedback for what is appropriate. because we look beyond just the classroom experience, and I'm going to hold what else we do for Roberto to be able to share that. But I extremely think that's important. We also have classes, over 30 African American history courses in our high schools. We have, in addition, some in our middle. Now, the question is, when we're looking at the teaching of that content, what does it look like? And so that's what we're working on, to ensure that that content doesn't start with slavery, because our history as a people did start with slavery,
Absolutely.
right?
Set the foundation.
And I think that what we suffer from, what we're working on, is having qualified educators who understand our history. And I often tell a story that I started in college, I wanted to be a social worker, and I happened to have an opportunity to take an elective. And I took an African history course, and that one course switched my trajectory, because in that one class, I learned more about myself, my history, than I had in all of the education that I had received prior. And so I don't think our children should have to wait until they're a junior in college to learn some of the essence of our history. And so in the past, we have been very aggressive with our professional development for African American history. We are kind of in a lull, but we're still working toward that. They're working on preparing Canvas courses where teachers can go in and have access to those learning materials that have been vetted by the district. But what we caution teachers is, don't go off on your own. Because there's times when teachers will like to create their own lesson plans, or to take a standard that's not appropriate for that age group and then teach it. So we're working on making sure that, of course, that we stay within the parameters of that mandate, but at the same time, we have to be aggressive as community people and as parents. I'm a parent of 3 kids, they're all grown now, but when my own kids were growing up, I personally would take ownership of educating my kids. And so when my kids went to school and they were reading certain things, they kind of knew where they should be in that time period. And they could voice it within their teachers in a polite way. But again, to be able to have some aha moments where you should be. And so as a community, as parents, this is where we add that additional pressure to our leadership. And I would dare say, that leadership doesn't start in our counties, right? We have a whole a commission of education who sets the tone. And one of the things that we talk about, the rewriting of the curriculum, it was only history that they focus on. The mandate is K through 12 across the curriculum. So language arts have never been prohibited of using our works. Okay, so again, understanding exactly how the law rolls out, what it's supposed to have said and what it actually says, is what we need to work on. So again, in Broward, we are actively trying to ensure that we're including African American history. Are we where we would like to be? No, but we're working on it.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. So just to add on to that a little bit, one of the programs that I've been developing over the last few years in collaboration with the team is engaging students in cultural outreach field trips. And so last year we added the Black Police Precinct down in Miami. So we had law study students, we had African American history classes that went down to Miami and actually experienced that facility. That's a powerful facility because it is an overtown. It does have a courthouse, a courtroom in it. It does have a jail, and it is a police station. So it is a real powerful symbol of the Jim Crow segregation that existed in Miami, and that, okay, the law says one thing. Here's the reality. Here's the tangible historical proof. I don't have to tell you what to think. Experience it for yourself. Come to your own conclusions. You know, because the law has been pretty clear. We have to teach things equally and fairly and without bias. So for me, taking students out to experience these sites, just last week, a colleague and I went to the historic Hampton House, and we're looking to add the historic Hampton House. So we are looking constantly. The Spady was brought up this evening, and I'm like, you know what? I haven't been to Spady yet. I know Emmanuel's worked there, and I know I got to get up there soon. So that might be another field trip for, you know, our team to go up and visit it. But we're constantly looking for ways to get students out of the classroom to experience some of these historic sites. And by the way, experiencing historical cultural sites, museums, and cemeteries is one of the new Florida African American history standards for high school. All right. And it was stuck in there. And how do I know? I'm the person that helped write it. Because I wanted to make sure that that was there as like another like safety valve in case, you know what, we can't talk, but we can take them. And it's there in the standards.
That was a brilliant move. I'm really grateful to hear that. And I know right now we work most closely with Marion, bringing students through ARLIC. We have the fortune of being included on a list that when a teacher decides to bring their kids here, they can get support for substitute teachers and buses. And so we are leaning in. I haven't updated. You've been working on our tour training, and we're really going to be ready to ramp that up because we know that the experiential learning is also a very important part of that. I want to just tap into something else that I heard, and I'm going to add it to that list of solutions, and that is that when it came to advocacy, that's what I heard from you, Marion, that parents have a role to hold these educators accountable, and your weapon is that state statute. It's written, it's been passed, it's been codified. I've heard the governor himself even point to it in his defense. We need to be using it offensively. I also think more broadly in the community, how can the community members and groups like ASALA support parents in helping them in this advocacy? And we've seen the power of advocacy on the other side, right? When we talk about Moms for Liberty and some of the things that they have come into the school boards with and asking for, where is the opposite kind of energy in favor of some things, and including an inclusive curriculum. So I think that those are a couple of points. And then you actually gave us a really good pivot, Roberto, because we have here with us people who have founded and or lead cultural institutions. And that is a really big thing for me. I want to make sure that we all walk away with an understanding that places like ARLIC, like Spady, like Old Dillard, and like the Strong Bowles House are here, Bowles-Strong, I got that wrong, to have been doing the work. They've preserved the buildings, they're telling the stories. And so we don't really have to rely solely on these institutions. The public K-12 system, there are other things that we can be doing as well. So with that, I want to pitch it to you, Cynthia. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your work and the institution that you lead?
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And thank you for inviting me. I think I just about know most people here, just meeting you. My name is Cynthia Strawn Saunders, and I have the Bowles-Strawn House. It was actually my grandmother who came from the Bahamas, Cat Island, meow, Cat Island, Bahamas, back when she was a young girl, along with the other Bahamian, when they all came over here. And there was 3 white men that purchased these 300 acres called Carver Ranches. It was a subdivision of Broward County, unincorporated. And for some reason, they only sold land to Black people in the 40s. So my grandmother, they targeted the areas down in Miami and, Liberty City over town, Railroad Shop, and knocking on doors. Hey, listen, you can come up here and buy your own land and build your own house. And a lot of them were reluctant at first, but a lot of them came eventually. And my grandmother, as a single parent, was one of those. They built 4 display houses, and she purchased one of them, which is now historically is designated through Broward County as a historical resource center. In fact, I found out it's the first resident that Broward County designated. It took 3 years, 8 months, and 14 days to get it done, but it was done. And now that I am on the Broward County Historical Preservation Board, they are using that as a template. So now we can get designations as little as 3 months, depending on what Broward County Commissioner, they can hold it up. But other than that, the designation is easy. But I'm a singer, songwriter, artistic person. And I did not wake up one day saying, I'm going to do this work, which is recording, researching, and trying to get as much of the history of the Black folks that moved to Cabo Ranch, those silent voices, the 1940s and the 1950s. They were the silent voices. They were too busy just trying to raise their families and, build a community out of nothing from the ground up. And so just as clearly, Spirit says, it's time for you to move back home and do this. And I don't want to move back home. I was living in the island. But I'm so glad I listened to Spirit. And as a result, the house that my grandmother purchased for $895 when she was making $1 a day back in 1941 is now the oldest house in the community and the only designated historical landmark as of now. When I started reaching out to most of the families were there and still is. And when I started reaching out to them, they started bringing things to the house and just leaving it on the porch, artifacts and old stuff and pictures and some things I didn't know what it was. And so I had to learn very early on, and thank God for Kitty Oliver.
Oh, yes.
Where is she anyway? Because I had no clue about writing a book, how to put it together, how to do oral history. I had nothing, but I could sing now. That was my thing. And so the first person I interviewed, I found out I need to find out a better way to do this. So I called Kitty. Kitty, how in the world did you do your oral history? And she just put me on the right path. Arlick, this was a blessing. As soon as I said yes to Spirit, I will do the work. Arlick had their book festival. And baby, I learned so much, all the free workshops, all the famous authors that was here, all the questions you can ask. What a query, what is a query letter? So I learned a lot. And that's just it. When you're in your purpose and on your path, God just brings all the right people there to help you accomplish the task that he has given you. So now the Bowstrong House was born in 1941. It was designated in 2012. So this year it will be 83 years old. So all those little things that people left on the porch, what my grandmother left in the house, what my dad left in the house, I now own the house. And from yard sales, I threw out the furniture, and it's not an official museum, but it is a museum house. And people come, and I give them the history of Cabo Ranches from the 1940s. And 43 other families gave their oral history, and it's documented in the book that's right upstairs in the Resource Center. I just happen to have a copy here. Just happen to have one. And it's called Promises from the Palmetto Bush, the Genesis of Cabo Ranches. And 43 other families give their story, their history about Cabo Ranches in the beginning when there was nothing but a lot of palmettos and 4 houses. So today, I am so proud and I'm so glad that God chose me to do this work, because I'm now working on the second book, which is Hope from the Palmetto Bush. And there was 43 families here. I have over 60 interviews, maybe 70 interviews from the people that came in the 1950s and what it was like. And let me tell you, I have been so blessed. And every time someone, especially the young people, when they come to the house, and I'm sure you can agree how, at first I was nervous. I'm like, how can I keep their attention? You know how, but I didn't have to worry, because once they came in, everything was so different. I'm like, I'll give you $5 if you can tell me what that is. And I know they don't know. You know, the old fashioned bug sprayer. They don't know. But then they taught me so many things when they come there. This one lady, young lady, I was showing her the platted map dated 1941. And And she tell me, oh, this remind me of my geometry class. So she was able to make that connection. And I'm in that generation with 1 foot in segregation and 1 foot in integration. And back then, the parents, the teachers, everybody was your parents. And the parents, whatever the teacher said do, to the students, they did it. And the parents make sure they were all together and they worked together. The parents, most of the people back there didn't even complete elementary school. But education was important and going to church. Those two things that's gonna happen, you have no choice. And the teachers, and we didn't realize how young the teachers were. The teachers are really young, and most of them lived in our community. So you know you can't mess up then, right? And they, just call your mama, and there you go. You know what's gonna happen then.
Let me ask you a question. Give us some feedback that you've gotten from some of the people that you've interviewed. What are their thoughts on the work you're doing with the historical house in the community?
Well, first of all, they were reluctant. When you knock on that door, you got to go down your whole lineage before they open the door. You know, my grandmother that went to so-and-so church, or my dad had to just join on Pembroke Road. Now, once you start telling them, oh, baby, I remember you because I was born there. I was raised there. So I went to school with their grandchildren. So, oh, I remember you from a little girl. Then the door opened. And then they're going to feed you, and you can't say no. And they're going to give you something to drink. Oh, yeah, baby. And sometimes you have to come back. You don't get it all in one visit. But when they trust you, when they know that you're listening and you're really interested, they will tell you some stuff. A few people say, turn that video off because you can't put this in the book. They would tell family secrets. I'm like, your family don't know that? No, and you better not tell them. So these are important things. And just one last story. There's one young man, there's a picture on my wall in the gallery, and I point out certain, each family provides a piece of the puzzle. And each family gonna have a lot of the same thing, saying it's just rocky roads and da-da-da-da. But each family has something special that only they contributed to the neighborhood. And this one young man, I said, your great-great-grandfather is on that wall. His name is John Adams Sr. John Adams Sr. purchased 35 acres in Otis in the 30s. And of course, you know what happened when eminent domain came out and they forced all the Black people to leave that area to sell for little or nothing. John Howard Adams Sr. took them to court. He refused. He paid $50 an acre. He did not win. But in 1948, he was awarded $500,000 for those 35 acres he purchased for $50 because he challenged it. And they knew what was coming there. So they awarded him that. And then, of course, they moved to Carver Ranches and bought up a lot of land. But he was one of the richest men in Carver Ranches at that time. And there's so many other stories. So get the book. This book, as it is here at the library, is in the specials collection, so you can't check it out. It's also in Atlanta at the University of Emory in their special archival section library, and in Washington, D.C. at the Blacksonian.
Oh, very nice.
And thanks to Arlick for that, okay? Because Smithsonian came down one year. I don't know if any of you remember. Remember when they did that? I forgot what they called it. Yeah. It was like the antique, and you can bring your artifacts, and they would give you not necessarily a monetary value of it, but a historical value of whatever you bring. And they show you how to pack things, how to store your photos, how to store your wedding gown, so the critters won't eat it up. All kind of stuff.
That was during the period when they were collecting for the new museum. So they went around the country to see what there was historically, because a lot of items they took with them to put in the museum.
You did? Okay. Well, he took my book, because I'm like, how I get my book in there? And the lady said, talk to that man over there. So I talked to the man over there. And I said, you got to walk with your stuff, right? And I handed him, I said, come here, take a picture of me handing you my book. I said, how I know it's going to be there? He said, we're going to send you a letter. So, and he did.
I want to turn to Emmanuel. Tell us about your work at Old Dillard Museum.
All right. So, good evening, everyone. All right. To talk about Old Dillard, I got to talk about what got me into this position in the first place. I'm from Hollywood, Florida. There's a neighborhood called Liberia, historic Black community, Black Hollywood. And I went to South Broward High School, which is one of the high schools that was an all-white school at one point. I believe it's the second oldest high school in Broward County. And that was where students from Addicts, when integration happened, many of them went to the likes of South Broward, Hollywood Hills, MacArthur, and the likes. And it was a book that I read called Race and Change in Hollywood, Florida by Dr. Kitty Oliver that really inspired me because it talked about the Black experience in the South Broward County, which is where I'm from. And growing up, when I knew of Liberia and Daney and Carver Ranches and Hallandale, I only knew it as the trap. I only knew one side of it. I didn't know the greatness of these communities. I didn't know, you had Addicts as a Black high school. I always knew it as a middle school, but the book taught me there was a high school. It taught me about the Paradise Club and the Palms nightclub and the social gatherings that was happening. And that's what really inspired me to get into preserving and documenting history. I didn't even know. I was originally a film student. I liked making films. I liked telling stories. And I wanted to utilize that in a way to benefit the community. And that was when I started the Black Broward Film Project, a documentary series telling the stories of Black communities in Broward County. It was a self-funded project with myself, Preemie Matthew Sterling, and Ian Mann. We came together and worked on this film. And it ended up doing a lot better than we expected. We were just seeing it as just being a community film project. And while I was interviewing many of the elders for the film, I was taking a liking to hearing their stories. And I just continued on this path. And it led me to the Old Dillard Museum in 2022. But even before the Old Dillard Museum, it was taking me to many places. My first big break was actually going back to Kitty Oliver again. She got married around this time, and she was, on her honeymoon phase and everything. And she was received an opportunity to go to Lake Wales, to the Lake Wales Museum, to do an African-American archive project for that museum. So she recommended me since she got married, and I ended up moving to Lake Wales for 2 months. At that time, I was unemployed. I needed money, so I made the most of that situation. And that situation really showed that I'm capable of doing the work that I'm doing. And I've been consistent ever since then. And then shortly after that, I was gathering so much history, so much documents, and I was just having them around my home. And it was like, all right, what's going to happen if something tragic was to happen to me? And I have all these documents, all these oral histories. What am I going to do with it? And in that year, 2021, when I came back from the Lake Wales Museum, I ended up coming to Arlick to see, hey, can I donate these artifacts? What can I do with it? And at that time, Afua was the archivist here, and she recommended me to start my own collection. And that was what became the Emmanuel George collection, which is here at the African American Research Library, which talks about the Black experience in South Broward. It has the Addicts High School yearbooks from 1953 to 1968. I'm looking for 1952 because that was the first graduation year, but I'm still on the quest for it. And then came Old Dillard. The opportunity came for me to be at Old Dillard. And I was always at Old Dillard for years already prior. I was always at Arlick. I've been in Spady. I was always traveling around and just being at historical landmarks. So I knew the Old Dillard layout already. And when the opportunity came for me, I made it happen. And currently there at the Old Dillard Museum, we are a hub. And I see myself as the bridge between the elders and the youth, the millennials and which is myself, my generation, the Gen Z after me, and the Gen Alpha that's after Gen Z. So I'm very big on intergenerational work, connecting the elders with the youth. And that's always been something that I've been so adamant and passionate about. And it's really has taken off to where it needs to be. This year alone, going back to January, I proposed a workshop to Blanche Ely High School called Storytellers of Tomorrow, to where select students from their journalism club will be interviewing elders from the Rock Road Restoration. And the proposal became such a success that the students spearheaded it for themselves. I came to the school like 2 days, and the students have been doing such a great job. And ever since then, they have still been interviewing elders from Ely from the 50s, 60s, 70s, when the school closed for a few years, but they got some of the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And in October, they are actually going to be showing a film of what they've been doing at the Blanche Ely Auditorium. We're also doing the same at South Broward for addicts. And we're going to be doing the same for Dillard as well, making sure that the intergenerational work continues. And that's where I've been ever since. And it's really been taking me to where I need to go.
I just want to commend you so much, Emmanuel, for your intentional advocacy around that bridge building. It is critically important. There can be often these generational divides. I know many of us in this room have experienced it at one level or not, but it's so vital. It's a really necessary fabric of our community that with all of the rigmarole and people working and trying to take care of business, and the kids are distracted with social media, we often forget to be intentional. And I think it's also very important because, Ms. Cynthia, when you were describing the neighborhood you grew up in, I got a little taste of that in the 80s growing up in a small town in North Florida, but we don't live like that anymore. Our communities are much more spread out. We don't live next to family members or next to community that are really neighborly and invested in our kids. And so it's our challenge as people that learn from the wisdom of our ancestors to find new ways to recreate and weave that fabric. And so, Emmanuel, I count you as a really important part of that. I want to also talk about something that Emmanuel has been a part of shaping and was it kind of came up out of some of the conversations we were having, not only about his work and how ARLA can be involved, but we were also looking at digitizing the West Side Gazette. How many of you know the West Side Gazette? It's been a really important community mouthpiece here, founded in 1971. We began having a conversation as the paper was celebrating, moving past that 50-year mark of being in business, which is really remarkable for any business and very special for a Black newspaper. We wanted to digitize those papers, but in all of his wisdom, Mr. Bobby Henry, who's a publisher now, his father started the paper. He said that he wanted young people to have an opportunity to interface and be a part of that project. And so we've been working for the last year to shape this project. And in October, we're getting ready to start the process. We're recruiting right now high school students to come out and be a part of the process of arranging and preparing back issues of these papers for scanning by the team with Broward Public Libraries. And so I think there's going to be some really wonderful exposure. They're going to get to learn about the history of the West Side Gazette. They're going to learn about the profession of preservation and what that work looks like. They'll get to learn a little bit of technology, taking a tour of the digitization workspace that we have at Main Library. And at the end of that, we'll be able to bring all of that to the community. It'll be searchable and available online.
I just have to say that project that you just described and what Emmanuel is doing with the youth and teaching them oral histories, these are ways that we can teach our children outside of schools. We teach them research skills so that they know how to go and get this information for themselves. I think it's critical. I think that our children need to know that this information exists, and they need to not be timid or afraid to go and get this information, and they need to have the skills to be able to do that. So I really commend all of what you're talking about. I think it's critical for our children, teaching them how to educate themselves.
And I think even more important, and this has been raised here, and this is more of a point of discussion, part of where I stand now here at ARLIC is, and looking at these challenges, is how can we contribute to providing additional resources, right? When you saw the headlines and everybody's reacting to them, and there does feel to be, felt like a contraction around what you could say and what you can do. And then you got people, kind of fiddling with it. We are also at the crossroads of book banning, right? And what that has looked like, and taking material and, kind of, even if it's not actively being done, to your point earlier, Brian, there's a climate that's being created that creates fear and apprehension on the part of teachers, and that causes them to be more conservative and to do less. And so the question for us here at ARLIC is as things are getting tight for folks over here in K-12, what can we do? And there have been a couple of things that we've done. First, we started our Saturday School Black History series. And so starting last October, we offered free Black History classes one Saturday a month here. Started for teens, but we had a bunch of adults who were knocking down the door. And so we eventually started an adult cohort, and we're going to be starting that again next month, our second round. The other thing that we did, and I worked with Roberto and I worked with Marion and Emmanuel, is that with Dexter Bridgman and MIA Legacy Media, how many of you received the Legacy South Florida insert in your Sun Sentinel? Well, we worked with him and we put together an insert into the February edition called A Parent's Guide to Black History in Broward County. And it's a 7-page spread. And in it, you can find a list of historical places like the Bowles-Strawn House. You can find the names of buildings. We drive down streets and walk past buildings every day that are named for people who've made significant impact here in Broward County. And so we provided just a little biographical snippet. And our hope was that we could empower parents to be able to have a conversation with their young people so that they can have the tools and resources to take into their own hands the cultural education for their children. But there were some really wonderful essays that were contributed that talked about, and you mentioned this, Marion, what Black history education does for a child's self-esteem, for a child's mental health. I wondered if we could talk about what you've seen in terms of the power of Black history once it is given to a child.
So this answer is extremely personal, as well as an educator, because I too share that space where starting school in the first person from my family started school in an integrated school setting. My brothers and other family members went to all traditional, they started in all Black schools. They went to Lincoln Park, which was a school right down the street. We were able to get up and walk to school. When I got to first grade, I was bused to a predominantly white school. And what I found is that there, even as a young person with my teachers, they had a perception of what type of person that what type of family that I came from. I was a fluid reader going into first grade. My parents were very religious, and so we read a lot. And I remember vividly, like it was just yesterday, that they seemed to be very surprised that I could read, and that they looked at me as if I was different. Little did they know, all of my siblings and my cousin was reading as well at that age, so it wasn't anything that was special about me. But my parents noticed that in that situation, I started to adopt a perception that I too was different from my other Black friends on the street in my family, because someone suggested that I was bright. Very quickly, my parents realized that this social experiment was not working for me. And so when it was time for high school, they said, we don't care what the boundary says, you're going to Dillard. Okay, you're going to Dillard because you need to, in their wisdom, they wanted me to see that it was more than learning when it came to just books. You needed to have that village. You need to have people, protected people around you to pour into you, to also give you the bridges from home to school. And I did excessively well in high school as well, but I also saw the people who looked like me. So I wasn't no longer the only one in the classroom. So I realized very early that I didn't have to be in a predominantly white environment in order to be academically successful. Now, 30 years later, when I had my own kids, my husband and I made very strategic decisions about where they would attend school. And so my kids from K through 12 went to all predominantly black schools, and they also graduated from Dillard High School because we felt very strongly that they need to be reinforced to who they are and not why they are different. They're all have graduated from college, 2 have already earned their masters, and they're very intact for who they are. And so when I say this, and I hope it doesn't sound off-putting, but my husband and I decided when we were raising our 2 sons that we wanted them to be a Fresh Prince and not a Carlton. We wanted our boys to be comfortable in their own skin, to be extremely bright, to be athletic, and to understand that they were not mimicking someone else's behavior, right? So as they went to all of these all-black schools, their scores were top-notch. They were bright, and it wasn't a dichotomy that you are a black boy or you're an athlete. You could be all encompassed, and that was who they are on record. So I say to parents that sometimes we feel that we have to put our child in a certain environment to get the academic pedagogy that they need, but what's happening is that they're being taught that they're a minority, right? And so your child can be in an A school and get an F education because they'll walk out those schools knowing less about themselves and not being enforced with leadership skills and advocacy. Professionally, I worked at a predominantly white school in Broward. I walked into an environment that was a very high-performing school, A school from the time that it was open, yet the black students in that school still had an academic gap. And when they wanted to explain the why, because these parents' social income were the same, they went to the same elementary, middle, high school, their parents shared similar professions. But the difference goes back to my own experience. When I was in elementary, it was perception. Some will have to make a decision on where to place your child. And in those second grades and third grades, there are decisions that are made that happens for our kids. And a lot of times, they're not placed in those top classes, even when their test scores say they should be. And so not only are we stripping our kids from having the best academic environment, in those schools, they did not teach the kids about themselves. So when we talk about Du Bois Talented 10, these kids should have been Du Bois Talented 10 because they were kids of parents who were educated. They had the means and the way, yet in that space, they knew zero about themselves. Now, my time at this school, not only did, and it really daunted me, I was really troubled seeing these kids who really had the opportunities to be successful, yet they're being denied the opportunity to do their history. And so, yes, we started clubs. I started a club at the school. I also was one of the first people in our district to craft an African American history curriculum. And the question was, how are you able to teach that class at that school? And I said, the need was just great. The need was just there. Our students needed to understand how to operate in a system by first understanding where they are in this system, how to maneuver in the system, and understand how to get beyond. And so when I say connecting that advocacy as a parent, you have to understand when you're selecting that school space for your child, is it the appropriate fit? Because if your child's an A student but knows zero about themselves, there's no leadership skills put into that child, the child only will leave with academics. And that's a very dangerous place to be as an adult.
Brian, did you have a perspective on that question?
Marion said a mouthful. And she got real detailed, but I can definitely say it started off from my own personal story, because learning my history and understanding who I am shifted the complete trajectory of my life, completely. When I was so young, I was so pro-black that it didn't make sense, right? To just like some of the things that I said, I changed my name without my mama permission and all of that at one point, right? But just from my experience, from being a classroom teacher and even as a district administrator, I've had the blessing and opportunity to do a lot of student-facing work and just even teaching African American history myself and just looking at the attitude shift of the students by understanding who they are outside of slavery, of course, right? Because usually when I started those courses and you teaching African American history in high schools and middle schools as well, our students were only exposed to their history in just the most awkward and the most sanitized, safe ways, right? And when I say being safe ways that are palatable to white supremacy, right? Not, our children learning about just the true power and agency that they have and learning about, the thousands and thousands of years of history that existed before slavery and even during slavery, how we resisted slavery, the systems of slavery, the various ways that we resisted. If it wasn't a violent insurrection, it was a way of protecting our hearts and our emotions, and our children being able to see that and seeing the greatness, even within their local community is another thing, that I found out as well, is that our kids are living in these communities that are named after individuals and activists and people who did significant work in that community. And those kids finding out that they live right there in proximity and even understanding that their parents and their grandparents and aunties and uncles knew some of these people, right? Also shifted their attitude. And what I've also seen is just as important as our children seeing who they are, is I've even seen attitude shift, even some of our white kids, right? When they see our history and understand who they are, and I remember, and it's a story I tell all the time because it's one of those things that resonated so much with me when I went to one of our schools in Boca Raton, which is predominantly white part of our school district. And this one white kid walked up to me after I did a presentation on Black history in his African American history class. The teacher brought me in as a guest speaker. Then after I finished, he, just telling how much he enjoyed the presentation. But what really hit me is when I was trying to walk away after saying, thank you, appreciate it. And he was like, no, I want to tell you more about my story. Then when he said, I came here 2 years ago from North Florida, right? And I said, okay, I definitely want to hear this now, right? Because you came from North Florida, right? Because we know North Florida, it's like almost like a different state, right? On the more further north is further south you go in Florida, right? And he said he came from a white supremacist family, right? So he said, when I stepped foot on this campus a couple of years ago, I was superior than any other person on this campus, especially Black people, right? But he said after sitting in this class and having an experience and understanding not just what Black people went through in this country, but the things that they have done for this country, right? There is no way that I can carry the same sentiments and attitudes as my parents because they're completely wrong. And this has shifted my whole life, right? And I thought that was so powerful because sometimes, again, we think that we're teaching Black history just to Black students, and that's Black history is this thing in a box, but it's American history, right? Because we know that our country, in order to justify the oppression that they put us through, they had to dehumanize us, right? So not only do we see ourselves less than human, our children see ourselves less than human, others from the outside see us that as well. But what really hit me with that is that, this kid could have not been exposed to our story, right? And inherited a position of power and became the president of the United States one day, right? Without being exposed to that. So, just think about how many kids, what really hit me is how many kids are we missing by not telling this history? How many kids are we missing because we want to keep African American history within a box of an elective course without integrating it? Like we say, Dr. Carter G. Woodson started this work, over 100 years ago, but we're still fighting the same battle. And just if we can make that progress and understand that our history is not in that box and just understand the psychological impact, the sociological impact of watching that history. And I've seen it firsthand with our students. I've seen it with our teachers. And just, our kids seeing who they are, understanding, first of all, that I stand on the shoulders of greatness, that my history did not start within a box of downtroddenness of middle passage and slavery, but even through that, how resilient and perseverant that we were and how we fought back, and just how our children can fully understand that just the power and the agency the Black folks have had, that they're still sitting there, right? That we still exist, that we live in a country that has made a very concerted effort to, keep us as a permanent underclass, and in some cases completely eradicate us in some parts of this country, but we still exist and we were still able to make positive contributions. And the last thing I'm gonna say is the most powerful statement I heard a kid say is if that we were able to, as a people, accomplish all the things that we were able to accomplish. And he pointed out that, I'm looking at, some of these early inventors like your Lewis Latimer's and your Elijah McCoy's and Granville Woods and the things that they were able to accomplish. And he said, this may be that first generation that can legally read. And you get a book in our hand and we're inventing things and making contributions to technology in this country. But what hit me is that when the student said that just imagine what African people would have accomplished and the things that we would have done if we would have been left alone. If we never would experience this intentional racism and oppression. So that right there showed me that you fully understand, first of all, regardless of what has been done to us, that we're able to survive, not only survive, but thrive in all of these environments. And even take it a step further of just the Wakanda that we could have created without imperialism and colonialism. So.
Thank you for that. That was very powerful.
Can I just add?
Sure.
Just my observation from when I get, especially some of the young people come. The city of West Park does this Camp Bravery during the summer. So I extended them to have them come and develop this program. And so, again, I get nervous with the young people because, I'm not technologically and all of that, but I don't know why I do that, but I wasn't sure I could hold their attention. But it was so different. And there was some, this has their attention. If you can get them to put that down, it's amazing. And because it was so different, they came in the museum one way, but they left out totally different. And when some came there, said, oh, that's my grandmama on the wall. And they see people in the community they know on the wall. And that gives them such a sense of pride. And again, the man, John Adams, there's a John Adams V. And he would call me, Miss Cynthia, can I bring my friends to the museum to show them my granddaddy? Because now, every time we go to Aventura Mall, he got bragging rights. This is my family's, And so it just amazed me. I did not know why I was supposed to do this, the purpose, but now I do know. This is my purpose. I was created to do this. And it's just amazing. And how the kids, they are teaching me so much. And because I am a creative person and with the music, I find that's a good way, another avenue to share the information. So I took information out of here and wrote a historical musical play, Their Story is Our Story, which was performed right over there. And as a result, there's still some people talking about, sing that song by Kokomo Joe. They will remember it more in a song than just reading sometimes, especially the artistic ones. So whether it's any of the arts, dancing or the drawing, but if you give them a theme based on the history, they will go with it because that's what they love.
It's a beautiful story. So I hear pride, I hear self-esteem. All of these are wrapped up in having an accurate depiction of Black history, and not just for Black kids, as you attested to, Brian. It's something I've heard here a couple times, and I want to come back to it. And I want to hear from the panelists. In your experience, how would you evaluate the role of Black parents in helping to expose their children to Black history? I think it's, on the one hand, that advocacy within the schools, those of you who work in the school systems, if you can maybe speak to what you've seen. But for those of you who work in kind of public history and cultural institutions, do you see the parents bringing their kids out and being intentional? Is there more that could be done to increase those numbers? Is there a need for that, or what are you seeing there? Who wants to jump in on that? Anybody? Marion?
I want to say that in Broward, we have an extreme diverse community. Our school is majority, quote unquote, majority minority. We have more quote unquote Hispanic and Black kids than we do white. And even when we work with our schools and they'll say a school is 100% Black, that really doesn't define the kids in the building, because that number could be a third Haitian, a third Jamaican, a third quote unquote African American, but those African Americans could be Southern or they can be Northern or Midwestern. And so we have to be very intentional with our teachers to be able to understand who you are looking at, right? Instead of coming up with a label. I say that to say is that because the parents are international, a lot of parents in Broward are working with their heads down. They themselves know very little about the history of our community. When we look at our population, every 5 years, a third of our teachers are brand new. And so it's hard for our teachers to be able to support the parents and bridging that gap. And then we have school of choice. So school of choice means if there are open seats in any school and you're willing to drive them there, you can drive your child outside of your community and they can attend that school. So then here again, there's not that home to school connection. I do dare say that some of the parents, again, because they may have come from a monolithic community, right? So they already know who they are. Their kids are the second generation. And so sometimes there's a tendency to be more focused on teaching your intraculture than the culture that they're experiencing at this time. I wish I had an answer to be able to say, how can we bring those parents to the fold, to make them understand that within this country, that the concept of race and culture, that there is a reality for them to understand and to embrace it, because their kids will experience it. We experience what we call intra-racism, where we all look alike, but we walk to the table with different perceptions and attitudes. And even when we look at discipline, some people think that it's more of our white teachers who are writing referrals on our Black kids, but in actuality, it's a lot of the intra process of Black people writing kids of referrals on ethnic groups that's not theirs. And that's something that we really don't talk about out loud, but it's important because unless we understand our collective history, we're stuck in this space, right? And we're stuck in this space when we're trying to educate people about here, and they'll say, but I'm Jamaican, right? So when you're trying to do the universal history of the community, the local, the national, there is a portal there that we are struggling to get people to come through. I think the answer again is when we look at each other, people see us as the same. It is only once we have that exchange with someone else can they then understand the difference. Once we get to that place across the spectrum, I think that we'll do a better job as a total group of getting these parents to understand the value of teaching African American history. Now, again, this is a conversation that as a community group, we have to acknowledge and then be able to try to problem solve. Because again, a lot of times people are not coming or are not participating because they don't see this as their history. All right. And so as we're working with students, we can get the students, as you said, to kind of adjust their thinking from their parents, but then to get their parents to come along with participating, that's another situation.
And Marion, thank you for saying all of that, because when it comes to sometimes Black educators and, a lot of these school districts do this shortcut to equity, and think that I just put Black educators at Black schools and we've solved the issues, right? But I always say that we need to put Black educators that are further removed from mental colonization in front of our kids, right? Because some of our own people look at those kids as those kids, right? And opposed to like, this is our kids, right? So I want to definitely, emphasize that. And, I'm real careful about saying that in certain spaces, right? Because I don't want to absolve white supremacy, right? By saying like it's our fault that some of these things that are taking place. But when it comes to engaging our parents, and one of the things that I've been very intentional about doing in Palm Beach County is shifting my language, right? And the semantics of what I'm saying is I'm not saying African-American history, and I'm not saying Black kids as one monolith. And also making sure that we use language of African diaspora children, and making sure that we go making concerted effort. Because one of the things that I do is I reach out to some of these groups. Like I know I was having a lot of conversations with a local Jamaican advocacy group, right? And I was working with another Trinidadian group that I found locally in Palm Beach County, the Haitian community. Even outside of some of the courses that we develop, there are 4 or 5 African-American history courses, African diaspora related courses that I wrote for the state of Florida that are elective courses that can be offered anywhere. And one of those courses is the history of Haiti in a global context. And also making sure that I point out within these histories that it's so much intersection, right? Because the history of Haiti and the Haitian Revolution had a global impact. Right. It definitely had a direct impact on what happened here in the United States. The Louisiana Purchase is one of those things, in addition to the various things that the Haitian diaspora has done, for this country and specifically here in Florida. So making sure that it's very intentional that I reach out to these different groups within the community and emphasize the importance that they have had, to our community and to our history, and that we all have a collective history. Right, because I don't think we do enough of that, and even showing within even African-American history, how much even the Afro-Caribbean community has been influential to that history, right? You can start with Marcus Garvey, for example, the largest civil rights organization that we knew in the 20th century was a Jamaican, in addition to, your Stokely Carmichaels, and, the list goes on, and Claudia Jones and so forth, people from the Afro-Caribbean that have made those contributions. In addition to, and one of the things that I said is that we have to go out into our communities, right? Because our institutions have not been traditionally and historically welcoming spaces for us, right? So sometimes we like to shift this blame, which I always say is just a whack excuse, right? Because our parents are not engaged, that we don't have the obligation and responsibility and be accountable for teaching those kids, right? But we have to make sure that we are making it more of a welcoming space, an affirming space for our parents, and really being intentional of going out and building those relationships. Like one of the things that you said, right? Even going to some of the elders. As a Black person, that you have to build that trust and relationships before you just can't show up in our neighborhoods and think we're just going to be give you everything that you want, right? Because there's so much trauma that we've experienced that people have to understand that in school spaces too. Right, that we have to, use people that have relationships with these community sometime, and even just go out and because I hear this one thing all the time about parents. They show up to sporting events, but they won't show up to open house, right? Bring the open house to the sporting events, right? Meet people for what they are, to engage and be creative and think outside of the box instead of shifting and placing that blame on our people for our condition. So.
I just want to let everybody know that we would be welcoming of any of the questions and comments you may have. So think about if there's anything you'd like to ask the panel, anything that has come up for you as you listen to the conversation. I'll come around with the microphone. But did anybody else want to kind of chime in on the role of parents? I've heard the school people talk. What about our folks who are working in cultural institutions? Are the parents coming through with the babies? What's happening?
It's a lot more work that needs to be done. That's what I would say. It's still a process, and we still got some room to grow.
Well, the school system, of course, I don't know anything about that. So you're going to have your restrictions in order to fit into what the school system say. But just personally, you just got to start with one, and start with your own family right there in the home. That's where everything, that's we had such a strong family unit used to is just weakening and everybody going different ways. But first start in the home, because once you say something that they can't unhear it. My son told me something I told him when he was 3 years old. I'm like, you remember that? He said, yeah, they won't unhear it. Now they might not take heed at the time, but a lot of times as they age and go through these different scenarios in their life, then they say, ooh, I remember mama said, So we have to be vocal. We have to talk to our children, and that extends out to the neighbors and then the neighborhood and the community. And that's what I suggest.
May I ask you a question? How much visitation do you get from people of European descent?
I'm sorry?
How many white people visit your space?
I don't know if I have to say a percentage wise. No. Well, first of all, it's a small house, and there's no parking space to have big events there. So I'm limited on what I can have there. And the house is small. So when Camp Bravery came, they had 50 children, and I'm like, you can't bring 50 children here to my house. So bring 10 at a time. 5 stayed inside with me, do the tour, and 5 went out back with Uncle Grover, who's a farmer, and he taught them how to plant stuff. We had all Home Depot donated a lot of stuff, and they learned how to plant. And again, a couple of months later, Miss Cindy, my plant this tall. And the others say, Dad. But they listen and they're trying, and they're hungry. Whether the children know it or not, they are so hungry to hear this. They're so hungry for us to take the time out. And don't look at how the pants hanging down. First just get them, meet them where they at, and hug them. They need some hugs. These kids need some hugs. Oh my God. I'm like, come here, baby, come here. And you better give me a 2-handed hug, not no. But they need it, and they're hungry for it. And we need them to need it, because we need to share it.
When on the day when you had so many children come and you taught them to plant and everything, and I think that's amazing, were their parents with them?
No, this was a program from the park.
Okay.
But I do get parents there. In fact, I've had a few families, because we still have a little bit of the village in Carver Ranches. Not West Park, but Carver Ranches still has the village. So, some family reunions, when they have the family reunion, they say, Sin, I'm going to bring my family. I say, bring them on. And I put them in the backyard. I got a big backyard, right? And we might make some homemade ice cream. I said, yeah, come on. I might make you some red Kool-Aid in a jelly jar. And, and then the seniors will come, and then they talk about good old days, because, I have everything, the washboard and the pump. So I'm ready. So if we go back to the olden days, y'all come to my house. We put that pump back in the yard. We get some water.
I'll let you know now when I come. I want some homemade ice cream. That's my Uncle George. May he rest in peace. That was our holiday
All
treat
right,
with him
no
and his
problem.
crack. So I haven't heard that in a while. For our audience, any comments, questions for our panelists? You've been listening so attentively. Orlando, I don't know if anybody's chimed in online. If there's anything coming from folks there. Baba Jean, hold on. Let me get you the mic.
I have to, well, what can I say? When I got the word, I said, I'm not going to miss this. And I'm so glad I came, because it's even better than, I can't say I anticipated less, but it's really good. And I've had, so many thoughts, but a couple specifics. Roberto, I'm so glad you're doing field trips, because, as we are seeing it, when I say we, I work with a number of historic preservation projects. I think there's like a whole shift in how people are appreciating history, not so much in museums that carry, big boxes where you have artifacts, but the places where the history is made. And since you are bringing folks to Miami, Virginia Key Beach definitely should be on the itinerary, because that was, the hub And of course, there's any number. I mean, there's, Florida Memorial University and others. So I'm just so glad you're doing that. So many good things were said. I'm trying to, keep track of all of them. One of them, Old Dillard, Emmanuel, you may know, I have a whole portion of my life was, dealing with a number of, designing, installing exhibits and so forth, including the jazz room. And one of the rituals we wanted to establish, and I think it happened maybe 1 or 2 years, is September 15th, which is coming right up. It's Cannonball Adderley's birthday. And, when we established the jazz room, we were saying, we ought to kind of have an event every year. It so turns out that September 15th, and just a sidebar on Cannonball Adderley, the younger generation doesn't know. When Old Dillard Museum was Dillard High School, first colored school and all that, that was Cannonball Adderley's first teaching job. He came out of FAMU, which was then FAMC. He was only a couple of years older than the seniors. But, talking to some of those folks, they remember that he was so inspirational. From early on, he let them know that composers like Duke Ellington and were on the same par. Like you learn about those as you learn about Mozart and Beethoven, and he really made such an impact in Broward. Mr. Bradley, who was kind of our iconic, a docent there. He told a story. I don't want to stretch it out too long, but there was a football game. FAMU was playing some of the team. It was halftime. The other team's band performed it, but everybody was waiting for the Marching 100, and they came up, showed out. And then after that, Cannonball Adderley walked out still in the middle of the 50-yard line, played an alto sax solo.
Wow.
That was so captivating that people forgot all about the football game. It was like, oh, right, yeah, And Mr. Bradley had, what did they call that? Identity, memory. I mean, he could remember. So he could tell that story, in such detail. So, you have those kinds of iconic presences. But what I'm thinking, September 15th is like a few days away. There's not a whole lot of lead time to do much. But here at the library, it might be a good idea to have a display that honors him. September 15th is also the birth date of Jesse Norman, soprano. Jesse Norman, 1989 was the bicentennial of the French Revolution. Somebody had to sing the French national anthem for the nation of France. They selected Jesse Norman from Valdosta, Georgia to do that. So that tells you something about what kind of presence she had. And she was, absolutely remarkable performer. I had one experience that just, her voice, her performance, took me to a whole other place that I didn't expect to go. The other memorable event for September 15th is the Birmingham church bombing. And so, since it's sort of timely to mention that on 9/11, as we think of all these tragedies, that's one that should not be, lost in history. And I guess the other thought that I had is, and I'm glad that all of you are seeing and feeling this need to approach the story we have to tell from a different perspective than the colonizers, because, we had this, there's this whole tendency, of course, to, the colonizers see things from the outside. They all see all the divisions and the labels and so forth. And we, of course, are looking at it in the opposite way. And one of the things that's missing, and why I bring that up is, we have the mandate, unfortunately, an unfunded and unenforced mandate to infuse, the curriculum, which only 2 or 3 counties in the state have really taken seriously. Broward, Dade, and Hillsborough, pretty much, and Tallahassee itself, somewhat. But that mandate came about kind of as a response to an earlier mandate that the legislature passed to teach Holocaust history. And there's something that's really kind of wrong about, okay, well, if you're going to do that, then you got to do Black history. Well, if you're going to do Black history, you got to do women's history. Well, if you're going to do that, wait, this is crazy. Why are we doing this, in this piecemeal fashion instead of as a human race, which is kind of a lot of what you're, sharing. And I guess there's a specific here, which was, is the school system still doing oh my God, African History Forum, I think it was called, for all the middle school kids?
Yes,
That
the signature grant.
Right, and see, that was also inspired by, the template for that was this Holocaust history.
Yes.
Brian, I'm so glad to hear you say the same thing. I don't know how loud I had to beat the drum every year to try to get our history does not start with slavery in North America. And they were, it was like,
Pulling teeth.
and then they would say it was like a favor to me. People, But anyway, I guess the key thing in here is, especially here in Florida, the Native history. All of this American history, American history didn't start in, 1492, 1776. This is the history of the land, from everything and everybody that was ever part of it. And how that is not, what does it take? So if you don't have a Native person in the legislature to sponsor a bill, nobody thinks that that needs to be taught. So I guess in this weird, uncertain atmosphere that people are working in with the, outlawing truth, has there been any kind of overt way to kind of like at the cultural institutions where we do land acknowledgement, like it's wonderful that you came, but by the way, folks, before, and then likewise in talking about Black history in the with the mandate. I mean, now we know that these two, slavery and genocide, where each was the cause and the effect of the other, so they're inseparable. But with the Seminole Maroon and all of that, is there a way to sort of bring a higher consciousness of the Native presence into how much of the curriculum we're allowed to teach?
I'm going to pass that answer to Roberto.
So thank you so much, Professor Tinney, for your comments and for that question. We have been for many years collaborating with the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and we do take whole grade levels of schools to the Atatiki Museum on Big Cypress. We also have collaboratively with them 2 annual events. We have one in November, and then we have one in April for Earth Day, where we take them out to the Ackley Museum in Hollywood. And so we take a lot of schools there so they can, participate and see and experience Native American culture. We are working this year, and it's something that I actually spoke to my supervisor about a few days ago. We want to start a traveling trunk program in the school district. And so a couple of like the focal points for the trunks, one of them we would like to be either a Seminole trunk that kind of tells some of the Seminole War stories, because we don't teach that as explicitly as we used to. And in reflecting on it, I remember learning about the Seminole Wars when I was in school in South Miami. And so I remember reading it in a textbook at South Miami Heights Elementary School, and I'm like, oh, the Seminole Wars, and that was the first time. And I remember every time I would find it, I'd always like cling to it, like, oh, what else can I learn? And then when I started teaching, it wasn't in the books. And so I would teach it to the students. And so that's something that, that we are explicitly trying to do. I do know that we do have a Seminole War, second Seminole War battle site in Pine Island. By Treetops Park here in Broward County. And so that's a site that I would love to be able to take students to and kind of use it as an opportunity to teach about that story. My big apprehension is to try to tell it from a Seminole perspective. When we teach, when I've taught and I've learned, and, I was in the military. And so for me, it was there were 3 Seminole Wars. And so I remember presenting a paper at a conference, and we talked about it as a war of attrition. And I'm like, for the Seminole, it was a real long war of attrition, because some of them were removed and some of them stayed. And so there's even, conversations about that. So for me, my big apprehension with teaching the Seminole story or even the Miccosukee story is making sure that I'm honoring their story and not kind of, and I know that they're very much like, you can tell whatever you want. But at the same time, I don't think it does justice to our student to hear the white perspective or the American perspective on the Seminole Wars, especially when, for me, it was just mind-blowing to think it makes sense why you think of it as one long war. But we compartmentalize it because that's just how we do things.
Is there the possibility of a partnership with the Seminoles and having them actually tell the story?
Yes, so we have been working with them through a colleague, Kim Cunningham. She's been really working with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. And then, before I forget it, Kim has also been the person that for several years, when we've had our Student Support and Academic Enrichment Conference in Broward County, she will do the land acknowledgement. And so she recognizes the Seminole, she recognizes the Miccosukee, she recognizes the Taino, she recognizes the Calusa and the Tequesta and all like the native groups that were here, and of course who was before, as part of like a way of reminding us and grounding us in like, we are on stolen land, and that is part of this story and we should recognize that. So that is a very important aspect of that conference, is telling that and acknowledging that land, so.
I also think about the second Seminole War, which historians have recorded as a Negro war, quote unquote, that there were so many Africans who had run away from slavery, who were living amongst the Seminoles, that when those generals looked out on the battlefield, that they were primarily fighting people of African descent. And I think that it gives I love those little wrinkles and complications, right? To the story. And I know Larry Rivers in particular talks about that as one of a major battle of resistance to slavery. And so there's another layer to that story that I think is wonderful that you've taken the initiative to put that in front of your students. I had a comment here.
Good evening, everyone. You said Larry Rivers, Dr. Rivers from FAMU. He was my professor some 40 years ago. But anyway, it's good to hear his name mentioned. I don't have a question. I merely have a comment. Excuse me. I have been so blessed this evening to hear you all and your perspectives. When I came in the door, I didn't know what to expect. As a matter of fact, everything tried to keep me from getting here. The monsoon, I was like, I need to turn around. It's dangerous out here. But I'm glad I persevered and came. As you all spoke on your different perspectives and what you do about getting the training and the learning and the teaching out, I don't come from an educational background to our children. However, I was in the court system for 35 years. I'm retired. And it hurts me because I know those people that I saw every day in that courtroom could have benefited from this knowledge. Could have benefited from the knowledge of knowing what their forefathers did within the local communities. So I'm sitting here and my wheels are turning like, how do we get this education in the court system? So perhaps that we stop them at the beginning before they matriculate on through that system, to let them know that they are special and that their people had contributions, and that we expect for them not only to learn, but to pick up the baton and go forth. And yes, you've made mistakes, but you don't have to stay in there. You don't have to graduate from that institution, that you can be a better person in your community. Because a lot of, like you said, I heard you say about give me a hug and the two hugs, and sometimes when you're in the courtroom, you just want to hug somebody because you know they're hurting and they just don't know the history. They don't know what they bring and what they have brought to our communities and our country as a whole. So I'm glad that I was able to absorb what you have to say. And I just wanted to compliment you all on what you brought to this event tonight.
Thank you for coming through the rain and being here with us. Yes, another comment?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I think my concern is we essentially have a lame duck governor at the moment, and we need to be proactive in thinking about what comes next. And so I'm concerned as to whether or not we are, to piggyback on someone, the Holocaust curriculum has been certainly shored up considerably over the last few years. And shoring up that, that African-American curriculum and putting in place some measures, or at least looking out there on the horizon and seeing who we can maybe advocate for, promote for that next position of governor, so that we don't go through these fears. I know that Mr. Knowles knows that I don't have a lot of rap background, but certainly that one of the few lines that ever stuck out with me is "I am never scared." And but I do walk with caution. I do use, someone used the word semantics. I've never used the word woke in conversation ever in my life, but I do use the word enlightened, and we certainly need to know, find someone who is enlightened enough to understand that even those Enlightenment thinkers, as listed in our Sunshine State Standards, looked at the times, understood they were changing, understood that we cannot put up with, whether you want to call them monarchs or dictators or absolute leaders, that we have to make sure that we are paying attention to these changing times and changing needs of people. We need to make sure we're looking and advocating for those folks out there. And what are you all, and that's my question, is there a committee out there, because I love what's happening on the local level, but do you belong to another committee that's working on, again, shoring up that African-American curriculum, ensuring that all of that money is in place so that these lovely workshops, and I get sent all of this information with various workshops coming up, and I have one on the 21st with the Holocaust curriculum, just ensuring that we're out there, the information's getting out there, and promoting it as much as possible so that we don't get caught fighting battle after battle, which it doesn't really get us where we want to be. There's a question in there somewhere. So what are we doing?
Is that a question?
Well, I want to make a comment. First, I have to acknowledge Mr. Jean Tenney. Thank you so much. You have brought your wisdom, have told it this whole motion forward for our history. You have done such a great job, and I just respect you so much, as well as Ms. Debbie Rain. I was just speaking to her earlier that I was a teacher fresh in the classroom when I got started, and she kind of took me underneath her wings to make sure that I was doing the right things. And I'm going to say this, that we do have a national, we still have a state task force. And in the past, the African American History Task Force has served us well. Under our current situation, we have people who are not as aggressively following the guidelines that has been provided for the goals and missions of that task force. And so, again, we know that we have a vehicle. The vehicle maybe broke down right now, right? And as we get a change in government, a change in spaces, there is a hope that there's an ability to revive that. But in the meantime, we're still working together to try to ensure that we're sharing resources. I know that for many years, Broward, Dade, and Palm Beach, we worked together to make sure we were on the same page. And you're right. Then when we talked about the leadership and where it starts and ends, it starts at the top with our governor. And that governor will select the Commissioner of Education. Right now it's Commissioner Diaz, right? So he's holding the decision processes and what goes out to the curriculum specialist. So we have to be able to advocate to him too, to say, we need a clarification, right? And so even if he's not going to do it, we're putting it in motion. So if once he's no longer there should be an expectation that the next person will be. So again, I have to say that even though there has a perception limitations, we have to keep doing what we have been doing plus more. As educators, as parents, as community, we have to continue to do what we're doing plus more.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question.
Question.
I think the other piece that I heard out of that that's been on my mind is the way that Black history education inspires civic engagement. Because it's very hard to know about what it took for us to get the ballot, keep the ballot, barely hanging on to the ballot, all the bloodshed, all the fighting, all the victories that came when we were able to effectively exercise the franchise. It's hard to know that and then ask this question, why does my vote matter? And so I think there is a need for us to, in the same way that we're uplifting the Black history education, and for me, I come at this from a community's perspective, that we also need to supplement that with civic education. And I think that's another avenue and body of work that'll help us in the long term with all of these issues. It's because we don't understand at a fundamental level these systems that we often get caught flat-footed and are in a reactionary position when we have so much power and so much has been sacrificed for us to do this work. Round of applause, please, for this magnificent panel. Wonderful discussion. I didn't even have to really twist any arms. Everybody said yes, within a day when we extended this invitation. I want to thank Charlene's not feeling well, so she had to leave us early, but I want to thank her in her absence for serving as president of our South Florida chapter of ASALA. I want to thank all of our membership who's here. Jean Tinney has been one of the founding members of that organization. We have our newest member, Ms. Pressy, here, speaking truth to power. But I would just want to extend the invitation again to all of you this evening as we uplift the anniversary of the founding of this organization, as we remember its founder, Dr. Woodson, and his work, that if you're not yet a member of the organization, that you do consider joining with us so that we can continue this work. I want us to be a part and collaborate together to bring more of these conversations to the community. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity. I'm going to change my hats now from my ASALA hat to my ARLIC hat. I want to invite all of you back because that is a part of what we bring to the community as opportunities for people to learn more. This past Saturday, we started our Race and Justice documentary series. We started off with a film, Crossing Overtown, which featured the Black Police Precinct Museum, which Roberto mentioned. We will have our second installment this weekend with Chris Mancini's The Poison Garden. And this film has a decided Broward focus, focusing on the Pompano 4 and some of the racial injustice that has happened here in Broward County. So Chris Mancini is going to be here. He told me that Howard Finkelstein, our former public defender, will be a part of the talk back after the film. But that's this Saturday, September the 14th at 2 p.m. So please mark your calendar, come here. You can get a list of the entire lineup on the tables. There is so much more going on here. We do hope to see you back in the space again soon. Thanks for everybody for being here in the room. Thanks to you, those of you online who watched with us. And we will see you next time at the African American Research Library and Cultural Center. Thank you. Nobody move. I'm gonna take a picture real quick.